morning, everyone. So glad to see everybody here. I am Vivian Hart. I am honored to be the president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. And our program today is Affordable Housing, Perspectives and Issues. And now I'd like to introduce our wonderful moderator, Barbara Becker.
Good morning. I know we've already had so much business, it's unbelievable. I want to welcome y'all and our panelists, David Wohl, who's a developer of affordable housing, Sharayah Jimenez, who is an architect with the firm, I hope I get this right, Poster, McDonald, and Murtaugh.
Yeah,
and who has on occasion worked with David on affordable housing. And Marcus Ysmael, he is the program manager of Pima County Housing Center. Also, I want to introduce April Lewis, who is our timekeeper.
you guys know me.
She plays an important role as we have limited our speakers to 2 minutes to tell us about themselves, and then we give them an additional 10 minutes to talk about their definition of, perspective on, and role in providing affordable housing. By sticking to this schedule, we're going to have plenty of time to answer your questions. We hope there'll be lots of them. Well, let's begin this with Marcus Ysmael, who will lead us off on this.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. And just a little bit about the Pima County Housing Center that I manage. It serves as a one-stop housing resource center for Pima County. We opened in 2011 in the wake of the Great Recession. There was a big demand for housing resources. Much of the work we did early on was addressing housing foreclosures. And so actually that was a local neighborhood organization. Menlo Park was very instrumental in lobbying the county to approve some funds to repurpose the building we're in, which is a former bank, affectionately referred to as a banco. Sat vacant for many years, right where I am at 801 West Congress, on the corner of Congress and Linda, right next to a Rio Health Center, and we're just west of downtown. And so, unfortunately, the building was sitting vacant, attracting a lot of, homeless, and so luckily the county approved repurposing funds, and thus we were born. So we provide resources for both rental and home ownership, and we serve about an average 5,000 through phone calls. We get internet requests as well as walk-ins, and we provide meeting space for local nonprofit organizations that address affordable housing as well. So, and then we work with local and federal affordable housing funds to help develop and preserve affordable housing in Pima County. And so, and prior to that, I worked for both private and nonprofit agencies addressing affordable housing. So, there's a little perspective on what I'm doing right now and where I come from. So.
Okay, well, now you can go into your 10-minute spiel.
Oh,
Oh, well, I thought we were going to have them each introduce themselves.
Oh, okay. We'll have each of you.
I kind of winded down because I was looking at the cue cards.
Okay, go for it.
Hi, my name is Sharayah Jimenez, and I work with Poster, Murtaugh, McDonald. We are a private architecture firm. I've been practicing architecture now for almost 8 years. I've graduated from the College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture. And me personally, I've always had a huge interest in both planning and architecture. Corky Poster is also a registered planner as well as architect, so I've been very blessed to get to work on both planning and architecture projects throughout my career. I started out in architecture with the Drachman Institute. That's how I met Corky Poster. As you know, that was a neighborhood resource that offered free planning services to communities and neighborhoods that needed them. And so I'm very much interested in both neighborhoods private-public intersections, and our work focuses on affordable housing. So we actually get affordable housing projects built. So that's about it.
They're the best. My name is David Wohl. I'm the president of a development company, Newport SW, which is an affiliate of a California-based company, Newport Partners, which does affordable housing development in California, Arizona, Minnesota, and places yet to be determined. I've been working in affordable housing now for 32, 33 years. I started on the financial side. I ran what's called a community development financial institution that covered a 7-county area around Cincinnati, Ohio. A community development financial institution, or CDFI, is a nonprofit lender. What we did was we set up a pool where we borrowed money from banks and lent it to both for-profit and nonprofit developers on the theory that their expertise was doing commercially driven development. They weren't so familiar with the intricacies of the affordable housing world. That's less true now than it was then. But anyway, I ran this CDFI then when my family moved to Tucson in 1998. I set up as a consultant, primarily working in financing affordable housing. I helped the city with many of its projects, including the MLK apartments downtown, some supportive housing for nonprofits. And then for the last couple of years, I've been a developer with Newport, and we are now working on a project designed by poster Marco McDonald at the northwest corner of Stone and Prince. We just recently made a handshake deal for some property on the south side, so hopefully we'll be doing a lot more affordable housing in Tucson and in Arizona in general.
Perfect timing.
Perfect time. Well, David, why don't you start us off on your perspectives on, your definition of affordable housing and what it.
Well, thank you. So, the question that you always need to ask when the topic is affordable housing is, affordable to whom? There are so many, you will hear people complaining at the high end of the income bracket about how they can't afford their homes, whether it's because of increasing prices or increasing taxes, and I shed very bitter tears for them. My niche, and then you have to distinguish between owner-occupied housing and rental housing, which are very different worlds. You have to distinguish between single-family and multifamily. But there is a federal definition of affordable housing, which is housing is affordable if the housing costs, generally in the rental world defined as housing plus utility costs, in the ownership side defined as principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, don't exceed 30% of income, which in my view from the real world is a completely unrealistic definition. It is almost impossible for any low-income household to keep its total housing costs at 30% of their actual income. If you are making, say, $20,000 a year, you're not going to keep your housing costs at $6,000 a year with rent, utilities, things like that. So that's the theoretical definition, but it's not one that I apply in my daily life. As I said, there are many different niches. I have a very specific niche. It's rental multifamily housing. The primary, since 1987, when the Reagan administration's Tax Reform Act was passed, which actually, in retrospect, was a really, really good piece of legislation in many ways. That was just when I was breaking into the business. I had been practicing law before that. So in 1987, when the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, I'm sorry, when the Tax Reform Act goes into place, there's this brand new program that replaces all sorts of complex depreciation regimes that put everything into one single bucket, and that is called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a dollar-for-dollar tax credit, tax reduction that investors can use to against their tax, what the taxes they owe, if they invest in qualifying affordable housing. It has become the single most important program, rental housing program in America for low-income households. That has a very specific definition of what qualifies as low-income housing. And that is 60% of area median income for family size, adjusted for household size. So, the area median income is defined every year by HUD. It is what the median is, half below, half above. So the area median income in Pima County is about $56,000 for a 4-person household. Don't quote me on that, but it's somewhere around there. So 60% of that is in the low 40s, high 30s, low 40s. And so that, for my world's purposes, is a low-income, is low-income households. If a household has less than that, they qualify. If they have more than that, with certain limited exceptions, they don't qualify. So for my world, affordable housing is housing where the rent and utility costs do not exceed 30% of 60% of area median income. It gets much more complicated than this. In fact, when as I said, this went into effect just when I was breaking into housing. As I said, I had practiced law for a while, and I was tired of practicing law for many reasons, and I wanted to get into housing. And I went to graduate school to learn some of the intricacies. And I took a course on real estate development, and we had to do a case study as part of our studies. And my case study was on the low-income housing tax credit because the bill had been passed, but had not yet gone into effect. And one of the commentaries on it described it as a program of mind-boggling complexity, which was great because I was going into tax credit consulting. So you want programs of mind-boggling complexity. What do I do? How do I make a living? Well, I'm a developer. People talking, oh, developers, they're greedy, they're evil. Oh, neighborhood groups, you go to a neighborhood group meeting, oh, we don't want developers. If you don't want developers, folks, you don't want housing. We're the people who supply it. And so you can, without developers, you ain't gonna have any housing. So we find land, we get whatever entitlements, which are zoning and building permits and all those other associated things. Hire people like Sharayah and Corky and her colleagues. We go to people like Marcos or his colleagues in other agencies and beg for money. We apply to the state of Arizona for tax credits. We put together fairly complicated financing plans. Hopefully we get them built. Then we go out and hire builders to build it. And we hire property managers to manage it. And we comply with all the complex rules and regulations. And the most important rules and regulations for our purposes are the income limits, the rent and income limits. And those are laid down by the Arizona Department of Housing or their equivalents in other states. What the biggest problems we face, there are two, and Sharayah is going to talk a lot more about the second one because she comes up against it in her planning and design phase. So I won't step on her. I'll just say the two big problems are density limitations and money. There's never enough money. Apple recently announced they're putting some ungodly amount of money into housing in California, and people say, yeah, that's great, it's wonderful, but it only scratches the surface. With land costs, construction costs going up, it costs a lot of money to build these things. One of the things that drives me a little nuts is when people talk about this as low-cost housing. It's not. It costs the same and often more to build affordable units than conventional units because of all of the complicating regulatory structure. So it's not low-cost. But with declining public funding available, with increasing land costs, with increasing building costs, finding the money to do this work is one of the two biggest problems we face in my world. And then I will count on Sharayah to talk about the other problem, which contributes to rising land costs.
Thank you.
Hi. So David did a great job of going through all the more kind of technical aspects of affordable housing. Again, with HUD being the federal agency that manages all of this, we also have to comply with fair housing, and there's just a lot of restrictions. So it's very difficult to get these projects done. And politically, it's very difficult. Another issue we face in affordable housing is NIMBYism. So for those of you who don't know, NIMBYism is not in my backyard. So where we encounter this a lot, especially at the neighborhood level, is in regards to density. So as you know, Tucson has developed as a suburban town. It's incredibly, and we just have a huge infrastructure cost. If you think about streets, all this public infrastructure and how expensive that is, we don't have the population density to support that infrastructure. So as a result, you see disinvested, especially inner cities, where we have the huge cost of trying to maintain these structures, but not enough people to justify it or account for that tax-paying base that's going to cover all those costs. So moving forward into the future, we really need to think about density and how that is a much more sustainable solution, both financially, in terms of taxes and how we can spread those taxes over a smaller area, as well as how we can think about sustainability and not destroying more of our precious biodiversity that exists in Tucson. So, that's the big picture planning view. I'm pro-density. I think that there's great neighborhoods that make sense, and I see density happening at two scales. One scale is at the citywide scale, where in kind of commercial scale, which is a scale we work in with the low-income housing tax credit projects, where we're mostly dealing with apartment complexes, that kind of scale of building. That I think is perfect to go along arterials, where we have commercial land and where we have every neighborhood abuts arterials, where you have your major, most of those are zoned for commercial development. Increasingly, the way that, commercial development is going, it's in decline. We are seeing consumer shopping patterns change. People are going online. Increasingly, we're going to have more and more vacant land at these commercial centers. And that's the perfect opportunity for us to begin to plan and think ahead of how we can utilize this land better and think about where we put low-income housing. And another, at the neighborhood scale though, I don't think that an apartment complex or a high-rise is appropriate to go into, a suburban one-story neighborhood. But there are more and more communities that are looking at ways that we can densify within the suburbs. So those are accessory dwelling units, ADUs they're called. Right now it's illegal in single-family housing to have more than 2 dwellings, period. You can't even split your own house and have a duplex. And those, to me, that's kind of outrageous to me. I mean, family sizes are changing. We have a lot of homes that are bigger and older that are underutilized. There's lots of that you could divide a house up and have absolutely no change on the exterior. You wouldn't even know that it's a duplex, or even that maybe there's a small ADU in the back of the yard that doesn't affect the streetscape for those of you who are in historic districts. So I think there's a lot of ways we can think creatively about how to densify within single-family suburbs, but basically most cities are recognizing that this is an opportunity, as we have opportunities in suburbs as well to densify. And look back at the history of single-family zoning, it is exclusionary zoning. It is historically been used as a way to isolate and concentrate wealth and exclude others. And I think that more and more, I just came back from a conference for Choice Neighborhoods. One of the projects I'm leading right now is a planning project with an effort called Thrive in the 05. We're looking at the 05 district, which includes neighborhoods like Old Pascua, Barrio Limu, Miracle Manor, Orco Cotillo, Balboa Heights, Coronado Heights, kind of the Miracle Mile, Stone Corridor Avenue area. And again, an area that's seen significant amount of historic disinvestment. And throughout that process, we're talking a lot about mixed income neighborhoods and what does that mean? And the directive from HUD right now is really pushing mixed income neighborhoods. So unfortunately, if you look at a map of Tucson and you see the distribution of wealth by homeownership, I just saw this map recently, most of the wealth in Tucson is concentrated in the perimeter, in the foothills and in the kind of outer ring of Tucson. Again, we see a huge concentration of disinvestment in the center core of Tucson, which is typical for most, kind of suburban areas like we have. And so how do we begin to think about how we plan for mixed income neighborhoods? And again, housing and building typology is one of those ways. A duplex is going to be more affordable than a single family home. Apartments are going to be more affordable than single family homes. So incorporating all this variety of types of family zoning and figuring out how to place them in a way that makes sense for neighborhoods, to me that's where I think the conversation needs to go and how it will be productive. And so those are kind of my big things. Again, we talked a lot when I was at the housing conference about intentionality and communities really needing to make that intentionality for inviting these communities back into their neighborhoods, because again, they call it de facto, things have happened just kind of by de facto. I don't think there's enough studies out there or data to show how or why these patterns have happened, but basically, we need to think about better planning our neighborhoods to be a little bit more inclusive in that way. And so those are kind of my big picture things for right now.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, okay, for, from, we deal with a lot of constituents that and having a problem locating affordable housing, even families that have been awarded a housing choice voucher, also referred to as a Section 8 voucher, which helps subsidize the payment of their rent. They're having trouble finding units, not so much affordable units, but units that are affordable where the landlord will accept the voucher. So that's become a big problem. If the housing is federally funded, like some of the housing that we put our funding into, we have, agreements in place that require the landlord to accept the voucher. So, but those units are in the minority. So, and I think part of what's causing that right now is a big lack of inventory, and that is putting upward pressure on prices. Combined with, when looking at the rental market, we've got right now, and rental housing is in high demand, and vacancy rates are at their lowest, and so we're at a time where there's been a trend away from home ownership and towards rental. That's starting to change a little bit. There's some evidence recently from the national home builders showing that home buying by millennials is starting to increase. So they're slowly looking at getting into the market, but I think there's still been a big preference towards rental, and it's putting upward pressure. And also in Tucson, we've got a big that is aging, built in the mid-'80s. And as landlords upgrade, they, most landlords are financing these on their own. And of course, that usually involves a lender, a bank, and then having to increase your revenues to make those payments. And so while a lot of times, the property managers and property owners are vilified for, but they're just trying to balance their sheets and make ends meet and make a living for, the people that work for them, as well as for themselves. But, I think in the bottom line here is we've got a big shortage of housing, and at all income levels. We're starting to see an influx of new residents because of the major employers that were recently attracted here. So I think all of this is putting pressure on the local markets and putting pressure on prices and starting to price out a lot of low-income families, very low-income families. And so as David mentioned, what the definition of low-income housing is, but to us, it's not just a definition, but it's a household, and especially the households that are very low income. So the median income, $63,000 for a family of 4. 30% median income is what we're talking about with very low income, and so and that's like $19,000 a year. And so that's where a lot of our elderly are, and young families with one income earner, single parent households. And so it's very difficult for families in those situations to make ends meet and have a affordable place. The other thing that we take into consideration when we talk about affordable housing is decent and safe. The housing has to be decent, has to be safe. Another term that's used is naturally occurring affordable housing. We're hearing that thrown around on the national front. And Tucson and Arizona in particular has had a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing. In recent years, most of that is not decent and safe. And so,
or is going away.
Yes, in the county, we've got a lot of what we refer to as wildcat subdivisions. They're out in the outlying areas, so you've got an increase in transportation costs. And, that's the other thing that we're starting to look at now when we're looking at affordable housing. And so, you may have a housing payment that's affordable, but you're spending, much more than you should on transportation, having to drive back and forth, maintain, more than one vehicle for your family if you've got a 2-income earning family. And so then all of a sudden transportation becomes part of your housing equation in my mind. And so we look at all those factors when we're looking at where to invest the funds that we have, because they're very scarce. And so we work with federal funds from the Home Investment Partnership Program. We get community development block grant funds that can help support preservation of affordable housing. And then over the years, we've had, in recent years, 2 issues of voter-approved bond funds targeted for the development of affordable housing. And unfortunately, there are none available right now. The last successful election we had for the voter-approved general obligation bond funds was 2004. We tried in 2015, I think, was it? Yeah, and unfortunately the voters did not approve just that we put forward, let alone the one that had affordable housing in it. And so that was unfortunate because we saw with those local funds a way to leverage other federal funds, the low-income housing tax credit program, as David mentioned. We're able to use those funds when we have them to help leverage those other federal funds and the low-income housing tax credit program. And we saw that with those voter-approved funds, that with every one of those dollars, we leveraged 10 additional, dollars. So, we have a total of about 15 million approved between 1997 election and 2004 election. And, we put together 30 projects altogether combined with those two. Total development costs in excess of 150 million, which met our goal of 10-to-1 leverage, and then produced over 800 units with those funds. And so that's a tool I'd like to see come back into our toolbox. Hopefully, like 2021, maybe I'll put a bug in your ear as voters. We've got to go through a presidential election. We have to go to the voters with these funds in a general election. Previous to that, in 2004, we were actually able to have our elections for the bond funds in May. That changed with legislation subsequent to 2004. I can't remember what year it was, but now we have to go in November, and so that makes it a lot more difficult. And so, as voters, I think we can appreciate that and hopefully consider that, next time some of these issues come to the voters. A lot of good things can be done with those funds. And so when we try to do the same with the federal funds we get, we look to use those funds as gap funds to leverage funding from other sources. So we don't want to be a primary funding source to produce or preserve housing, except when it comes to like our home repair programs that help existing homeowners. But that's the other piece of it is now we're looking at health and housing, the intersection of health and housing, and we want to make sure we're building homes that are healthy and that are going to be sustainable and affordable. And as far as utilities and maintenance goes as well. So those are all important factors that we're starting to look at, starting to work with the other departments in the county, the health department, development services, and our housing commission. We're going to be working together to look at barriers that can be reduced to help produce more affordable housing, to help make it easier and less complicated. And so our development services department at the county has already begun to do that, and over the last 10 years done an excellent job of streamlining our process. And our development services team was recently recognized by the local Southern Arizona home builders for their efforts in that. And so those are things that we look to continue to do and continue to collaborate with our partners on the private side. And in December, we're going to be hosting, along with the city of Tucson, a meeting where we're inviting local developers like David Wohl to help discuss and get their perspective on how we can help create and preserve affordable housing in our community. So,
well, thank you. Oh my goodness, all three of y'all brought up so many issues.
yeah.
So I'm going to ask the first question, and that is, what do you see as the principal barriers to affordable housing? Dave?
Money and density. And I've talked about money, so let me piggyback on what Sharayah said about density. By the way, do we have time moving on this one?
I don't think so.
2 minutes, okay. Sharayah talked about single family, the restrictions on single family zoning, low density zoning. I have been driving around Tucson. I've been looking at listings in Phoenix, Mesa, looking for land that could be developed and that is properly zoned. And there is not much of it. Even in areas that are not single-family neighborhoods, that are not, it's going, whatever, single-family, Harold Bell Wright, whatever. Even in much more, less residential neighborhoods, the restrictions on density are pretty severe. Zoning is probably the root of all evil, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to housing development. Yes, you don't want to be next to a toxic waste dump. Yes, you don't want to be next to a tallow melting, or however you do tallow. But you can have well-designed housing that is 15 units an acre, 20 units an acre, that contributes to vibrant neighborhoods, and without it, if you want more housing, you have more density. That is the fight that is being fought virtually everywhere. California, the governor of California tried to get legislation passed that basically said, if you have a transportation area, like the transit hub, you have to allow a certain level of dense multifamily housing. And the neighborhood interests got all freaked out and killed that. One of the greatest things that has happened recently is the city of Minneapolis eliminated single-family zoning, period. So that, not that you're going to get a 15-story apartment building in every neighborhood, but you can have the accessory dwelling units. It will allow a unit to be placed in the backyard or a house to be divided. So, money, density.
Okay, does anyone have anything else they want to add to that?
This is slightly off topic, but another key point I wanted to talk about. Again, this topic spans across so many areas: housing, transportation, health, public health. So it's hard to really focus on one thing. But one of the interesting things that I heard at this conference I was at was just about talking about, after the recession, we had a decrease in homeownership, which again, homeownership as a key wealth building tool for families is, that's sad, that's a loss. And so we're seeing these increasing wealth gaps, throughout our cities and throughout our country. And more we're seeing that, families in low-income neighborhoods have lower life expectancy. I started out in a lot of pretty radical political activism. And one of the things we talked about was that my Nana's generation, our grandparents' generation, was more healthy than the current generation that exists now. My mother is passed away from breast cancer, and it's very personal to me, this fight. It's true. We've had so many of my young losing their parents. Because our neighborhoods are just unhealthier. And, we really, and not just the correlations with, housing and health, transportation also. Again, you just think about the excess burden it is, especially in a city like Tucson, to be so far away from your employment center. There's just so many, the time that takes away from the family. There's just so many factors that they're so interconnected and so interrelated. And again, just the need we have for affordable housing is huge, and the impact that would have on families and especially young children. Another huge discussion that's happening is the determinant of your zip code for a child and your access to opportunity. And that children who are born in certain zip codes, again, they're poised for not for success. So how can we just really change these dynamics and get these families to more access and to more higher opportunity?
Thank you. Marcus, do you have anything to add on it?
Well, with respect to barriers to affordable housing, I think some of the big ones were touched on. And, I'll just add, aside from the NIMBYism issues, and barriers to development as well. And so, and I think the other thing along with that is, I think at some point, employment and benefits come into play, and we need employment for families that are here, that were raised here, and not just employment that's going to be importing professionals from a company that's relocating its headquarters here. And so we're seeing a little bit of that, with the Amazon development. I think we're seeing some jobs that are gonna help some local families, as opposed to Caterpillar, which is a lot of imported jobs, and so, anyway, and then I guess we'll have time to address solutions, right? So I'll leave it there for the barriers, and then, on the benefit side, for families on a fixed income, there needs to be more services and better integration of healthcare and housing, and so, yes.
Can I respond to something? Okay. Sharayah talked about the importance of homeownership as a wealth building mechanism, and that cannot be denied. It is certainly true. However, I remember very well the mid-2000s when there was a push to homeownership and putting people in homes they could not afford, one that they could not afford to maintain. One of my most vivid memories is back when I was in Ohio running the Community Development Financial Institution. I was on the Community Advisory Committee of the local bank. And we worked with the Community Reinvestment Officer on, sort of overseeing and commenting. So we had a quarterly meeting, and she comes and she starts the meeting by saying, we have a really exciting new initiative we're doing at the bank. We want you to be the first to hear about it outside. And we said, oh, great, wonderful. What is it? And she said, 0 down payment loans for low-income homeowners. And so, goes around, that's great, that's wonderful, congratulations, blah, blah. Comes to me, and I said, that's a terrible idea. And they all look at me like I'm evil. Which might or might not be true, but in this case, I don't think it was. And they look at me and say, why? I said, look, you're putting somebody into a house in which he or she has absolutely no investment. The house is likely going to be a piece of crap because you're not putting them into new homes, you're putting them into old homes where the first time the boiler goes out or the roof goes out, they're going to be out and they can't afford to maintain it. You've got to be careful with promoting homeownership. Yes, it is a very good wealth building tool over time. It is a good wealth building tool if property values are rising. A lot of people learned to their very great detriment that it was a wealth destroying tool in the late 2000s. So homeownership is great for people, I would say 50% and above of area median income and above. Yes, if you can put them into a house they can afford that has been inspected and that is in good condition, I'm all for it. But putting very low income people into homeownership is asking for a lot of potential trouble.
Okay, y'all. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to follow up on this homeownership as a wealth building tool. I live in downtown. As I get older, I think about what I would like, and that is a stable, safe environment. I don't really want to make money off of my home. I want to see my neighborhood continue as a stable, good place to live, and I want to see it being open to people of all different income levels and diverse in every kind of way. I think homeownership and the use of homes as a wealth building tool works against that in the long run. What do you all think?
Yeah,
Can we repeat the question, please?
I think
Up there.
the thrust of the question is viewing homeownership as a wealth building tool works against diversity because if people are trying to build up equity in their homes, that's going to cause prices to go up and will limit the ability of lower income folks to move in and diversify?
Not just diversity, also stability of neighborhoods, and neighborhoods continuing to be what they were. We're seeing huge changes very quickly in the downtown.
So keeping access to neighborhoods.
Yes.
I would agree, and that's something that I think a lot of older neighborhoods are struggling with to find that balance. One of the tools I see to address that is community land trust. And so we've got one in Tucson.
Do we?
Yes, Pima County Community Land Trust. It's got the county in the name, but it's a It's a separate independent 501(c) nonprofit with the board of directors, and so they were started actually by the city of Tucson, and then went through a phase where they were supported and worked towards becoming independent, which eventually they did. And they started off purchasing single-family homes in the wake of the recession. They've done close to 100, I believe. They've a little over 80 that they developed, and then they've started recycling those as families move out. They find another buyer that's low income, and they have an equity sharing model in place that helps them, promote that and keep it affordable moving forward. And the families buying it understand that when they sell, they're going to share equity. They're going to get some, but some is going to stay with the land trust to help the next family. So.
Well, and the land trust owns the land itself.
Yes, the way it's affordable on the onset, of course, the important point is that they are selling the improvements and keeping ownership of the land. And so that makes it, more affordable, and they're just selling the, the actual house, not the underlying land.
Daniel, you had your hand
Can
up.
I just follow up on that? Because there's another mechanism that's not in great use around here, but it's limited equity ownership structures, like a limited equity cooperative, where it's very similar. There's basically an agreement in place that you will not sell for more than a certain percentage above the value of the unit at the time you moved in. So you can make a modest appreciation, but you can't. It's not speculative. You won't be doubling your money in 5 years. It might go up 3% a year or whatever. But so there are structures that can create that allow a modest wealth building effect, but not a speculative wealth building effect that I think would accomplish.
Right, thank you. Dana,
So
you had
I-
a question, but would you stand up and talk very loudly?
Okay.
People in the back.
So, one of the things I see is that people really don't know how to budget money. An example is my neighbors had jobs, they bought the house high, and they tore up the kitchen, and it's like their kitchen was nicer than my kitchen, but they tore it up. Then the recession hit, she lost her job because she was selling real estate. He was asked to take less money, they lost their house to the bank. So I think, high schools need to teach budgeting money over calculus, because I took calculus and I don't use it at all.
Okay, that was not a question.
Okay, that was a
question.
comment. No, I know it's a comment.
Yes, Sarah.
Well,
Yeah, I would just like to, again, one of those important intersections between housing is housing and education. Again, I look at what's happened to our schools. In addition to disinvestment across the board in many areas, we've had a huge disinvestment in schools and education. I don't know why, maybe some other people who are a little older know more about this, as to why some of the important social programs were taken out of schools, like financial literacy, like home economics, like some of these things that taught basic life skills that unfortunately our children are not receiving anymore. And maybe it's because some of these, households are all so different, but I think there are some basic things, numbers things especially, that are kind of cut and dry, that don't have to do as much with cultural differences, that really need to be reinstated in education, as well as the technical programs that were cut from our schools, the job training programs. Paul Alberti used to be a technical school. My uncle is a machinist. He only he started out, learned a technical trade. He makes more money in the family without a college degree. But all those programs have been cut. So you think about our youth and their opportunities, and especially in low-income neighborhoods where all these programs have been cut, have been disinvested in, and what that does to our the future society. It's unfortunate.
Thank you.
Just real quick on we definitely agree that housing counseling and financial education is critical, especially for homeowners. And so HUD requires it when we're funding with their funds, and so we support that fully. And then at the housing center, we have staff that provides, we do a monthly credit counseling class Our counselor is certified through Freddie Mac with their Credit Smart program. And so you can find us on Facebook, Pima County Housing Center, and that's where we promote our monthly classes.
And I'm on the board of the Primavera Foundation, for example, and it is one of several housing counseling agencies in the area. And if you are using Primavera programs, ownership, which is one of our focuses, you have to, which includes a whole lot of financial literacy.
Betsy?
Wait, what about me?
Stand up.
Sarah, I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. You talked about regulations, about density of population and all that. My question to you is, how does the University of Arizona get around that? Because they have a lot of buildings with several floors and everything else.
Yes, the university, we work a lot with the university. They have their own, they're basically their own city. So they have their own jurisdiction over all of their zoning policy. But again, I don't, to me, it's this numbers game you play. So where do you want density? And to me, what the university, I think actually is a really smart solution is that we're gonna keep the density here in our little footprint and not put it in the neighborhoods. And I think they've worked really hard to do that, but because of the limitation of space, you just think about, you can expand this way or you can go up. And so they can't expand, they're limited by their footprint, so their only option is to go up. So I know a lot of people don't think that this density is contextual. I think that in the next 5 to 10 years it will be, as the rest of Tucson begins to develop and grow.
I didn't mean that. What I meant, you explained why they, I'm all for density. I like high rises, but that's beside the point. I just wondered how they were able, from the ground up, to be
They're a
able to
state
do that.
institution, and all state institutions don't come under city zoning.
Okay, that's fine, that's good.
Betsy?
Now I understand. I have to stand up. Sorry.
I'm curious about what the barriers would be. We have a lot of empty, almost, not just stores, but whole centers on corners that have good transportation and so forth. What's the barrier to going in and developing apartments and so forth in some of those areas that are commercially zoned? And I'm not talking about huge high rises, but reasonable that we see along Broadway and the Speedway and 22nd Street. What are those barriers and are those opportunities?
Well, there would be. So, for example, a lot of those are in a C1 zone, a commercial one. And a commercial one, you can go up 20 feet, 25 feet. Whereas in the C2 zone, you can go up 40 feet. The property I'm developing now on Stone and Prince, thankfully, is a C2 zone, so I can go up 3 stories. And it's an acre and a half. That's allowing me with parking requirements to do 40 units, 40 affordable units. If it were a C1 zone, it wouldn't be viable. So a lot of those buildings, those like either vacant or seriously underutilized commercial developments, have height limits. And I'm not talking about high-rise. I'm not even talking about mid-rise. I'm talking about 3 stories. You can't do. So again, it's along many of the commercial arterials. There was a site I liked a lot between Pima and Speedway, which is not a dense residential neighborhood, but it's zone C1, and that's 15 units an acre, 2-story, couldn't go more than 2 stories. And with land prices, you need to have more units to make it viable.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you name a number of things that address specific things that you're doing. But what is the scope of the problem as a whole? And are all of the things that you're mentioning actually going to address the problem so that some years down the road we don't have a housing problem? And if the answer to that is no, which I suspect it is, what is it that needs to be done so that some years down the road we don't have this problem?
Jobs. Good paying jobs. Yeah, we need, the community, needs to address, housing, and invest in housing at all levels. And so, that takes a lot of work, and, both federal, state, local, private, public sector. I think, we're starting to see more interaction between those entities, but I think that's what needs to happen. We need to have more collaboration between these entities and the community, working towards this common goal, and starting to appropriate more funds, put pressure on Congress and elected officials to appropriate more resources. Over the past 10 years, the resources that come to us through the federal government have been cut in half. Largely due to Republican Congress. We did see a switch on the House side, and we're starting to see a lot of good legislation coming forward from the House, but until we get, cooperation on the Senate side, we're not going to see that. And then just locally, we're starting to address these more in a larger issue, I think, with the city and the county and our private sector, but sadly, there's been a disinvestment over a number of years in housing, and right now, I think one of the challenges is money on the money side, and money that would go towards affordable housing. We're seeing a lot of activity in the high-end markets, and not enough to address housing that's going to be affordable to working families and families on fixed incomes.
How many people are on waiting lists right now?
It's gotten better, but we're still at 10,000 for public housing and the Section 8 program waiting list. And to put things in perspective, the City of Tucson Housing Authority has about 1,500 public housing units to address that need, and about the vouchers are about 5,500 housing choice vouchers. The waiting list was over 15,000. The city has, been working over the last few months to address that and turn more of those around. So it's gone down a little bit, but it's still over 10,000.
Yes, ma'am, you can.
How difficult is it to change zoning?
Yeah.
And is there any difference between the city and the county? There are multiple jurisdictions in the area.
You're the planner.
I think these guys would be better able to answer all of that, but yes, there are two different jurisdictions. In some ways, it's interesting to me. I think Marcos is right. The county's done a fantastic job of really trying to streamline their process, cut through red tape, make things quicker, more efficient, easier on the zoning and development services side. Can sail through easier. But again, I think it's finding that sweet spot of enough alliance building and really bringing together the issues everyone can get on board on.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, you can go in and ask for a particular parcel to be rezoned, and it takes time, it costs money, and it's an uncertain outcome. It's easier, getting back to Betsy's question, it's easier if you're in a more commercial area because you're not going to have neighbors screaming about their perfect Ozzie and Harriet lifestyle being destroyed. So it is possible on a sort of more global scale. A few years ago in Seattle, a legendarily progressive city that pours so much more money into housing than we could ever dream of, because the citizens of Seattle and of King County do something that is unimaginable to me in Arizona, which is they vote continuously to tax themselves for affordable housing. But even in Seattle, the then mayor tried to get a sort of blanket rezone for certain neighborhoods to allow accessory dwelling units, and those staunchly liberal, progressive, socialist voting citizens said no. we have our limits. As you can tell, this is not a topic on which I feel strongly. But yes, can it be done? Yeah, but, so for example, is my company going to buy property that is not properly zoned in the hope that we can get a rezone through in a very limited time? Possibly, but we, if we do so, we're going to do it with the expectation that it's going to take a lot longer and cost a lot more to develop than it otherwise would. So when I'm driving around, I'm looking for R3, C2, things like that.
Yes, ma'am, at the very back. Stand up.
Oh, I just would like you to address design elements in some of the properties that you're building in terms of helping the residents live together peacefully and to live with neighbors, and what kinds of things are you incorporating that make your properties an attraction for neighborhoods?
Right. So with Poster Martin McDonald, again, we're planners as well as architects, so we try to think about the big picture. And design-wise, I think landscape is huge. In Newport, we are putting a nice buffer between the streets. You know, we're right at a busy commercial intersection, so a really significant landscape border right between the street and the housing, and incorporating a nice playground for the kids. And you know, there's lots of things that you can do design-wise. And again, I keep thinking about multiplicity of typologies, of building typologies. In Tucson, we're kind of just used to either apartments or single-family homes, but there's a whole other spectrum of possibilities between condos, you know, row houses, walk-ups, you know, kind of the density you see in Boston or San Francisco, where it's 2 or 3 stories, not, you know, kind of in between a multifamily development and in between the suburb. And I think that incorporating that kind of, you know, ideally, a city is a nucleus. You know, you have your downtown core, the most dense at the center, and it kind of stacks down from there like a pyramid. And you can create those same models almost in reverse in a neighborhood, where you have your lowest density in the center and the core of the neighborhood, and you kind of step up to the density at the arterials. So again, I think allowing for the multiplicity of building typologies, of thinking about, you know, 2 and 3 stories in between the 1s and the 4 and 5s, you know, and then with great landscape in preserving our open spaces, reinvesting in our parks that are underutilized, all of that tied together. And then again, within our arterials, our commercial centers where we have livable, walkable communities. This is the new urbanist model that's really popular. And I think those are kind of the communities that we're trying to create moving forward.
And to give some props to PMM, building materials and building exteriors can be just as nice or nicer. So the Marist project that Poster Murdo McDonald designed downtown is an absolutely gorgeous building. And it's in fact a lot nicer than the market rate buildings that were put up at Broadway and Stone, which get a lot more rent, I can assure you of that. So it's landscape, it's the design, it's the building exterior, so they don't look like barracks. They don't look like the old model. It's providing as much community space inside your building, inside your apartments as you can, so that, as you say, the residents have a place to congregate. So playground, community space, computer lab, all of those things are going to the project that Sharayah and her team designed for us in Tucson, and will be in future projects.
Yes, stand up.
Do you ever work with Compass Affordable Housing?
I was actually the One-Stone project.
Yes, ma'am, stand up. Here.
I heard about the land trust. I'm wondering if the governmental entities keep track of vacant spaces of land that they still own, and is that a factor in affordability? I mean, could it be?
Yes, we're looking at ways that we can better coordinate the use of surplus land to help, promote affordable housing in general, not, just for the land trust, although they're a natural partner depending on the areas. But yeah, we're working on addressing an issue in the statutes that is currently limiting some of the surplus land and our ability to move it towards affordable housing without going through a long, drawn-out public auction process. And so hopefully that'll help, but that's...
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Stand up.
I'm curious about HOAs and how property is designated for builders and what can be done there, because it's clearly discriminatory to have gated communities because people can't afford to pay the HOAs. And I don't have an HOA in my neighborhood, but the houses are usually pretty close together in scale and type and, that sort of thing. Why could there not be some low income, and I think I heard 2 units per whatever it is, and make it multi-community instead of all the houses being within this range, the same appearance, same, affordability, and so that you give opportunity for low income or young families starting out to buy into a community that is mixed. I see my neighbors, across the street, cars are coming and going all hours because grandma's taking care of the kids now, and the kids can't afford to live in the neighborhood, so they transport all the kids in for grandma to take care of them, and then have to pick them up and take them back. Mm-hmm. And I think, how ridiculous! Why don't we have these mixed communities and do something about regulation of HOAs?
Yeah, again, it goes back to that NIMBYism issue. It's great in theory, but when you actually tend to try to push people to change those kinds of policies, it can be difficult. I think for me, and I've asked many people, because I think these conversations can be very polarizing, and that's not where I want to stay. I think what's really helpful is to think about the children and to think about the families. And I think when you're talking to your neighbors about maybe making some of these kinds of changes, really centering it on the family, and that, we're in a generation where we're seeing a generational shift. I live with my nana. I made my house a duplex to be able to have her close by to help with my son, and we're really living in an intergenerational way. And I think that kind of language is what you can try to use in talking to your communities. Aging in place, the granny flat unit is what allows you to keep your family together and really start to create these family compounds where you have families across generations living together. And I think about how those kinds of systems and living arrangements, again, reduce the cost burden in the future, because we don't have families just right away needing to go to Altex or be put in a home, or have this costly infrastructure, that the family is actually providing that stability and that support. So again, I think these are all great topics, and I think the only way I see forward and out of this in more productive conversations is really focusing on families, children, those beautiful communities that, and that's where I would encourage you to have those conversations with, people who do have HOAs and who do have these very restrictive kinds of limitations on housing. It seems that things get lost literally in the weeds. You're getting letters about your weeds and the paint color and, the signage you can put up in your picture things. Can we really talk about, housing, transportations, families, And I think it's going to take a lot of conversations, and I hope that that's why I'm here, is to start to get out the messaging to try to take back to your neighborhoods.
Doesn't some of that harken back to the value that people are so concerned about making money off their homes?
Well, yeah, I mean, not to get negative, but I would submit that there's a limited subset of people that actually want to live in mixed income communities, particularly at the higher end of the income scale. And so, if I wake up every morning thanking the Almighty that I'm not, but if I were a production builder of homeownership communities, and I were targeting my market, the economics are not in favor of my designing a community that is specifically intended to be a mixed income community, because I would find a very limited market for that. It would be much greater in an urban area. If getting back into getting people, generally in a city like Tucson, people live in or near downtown because they want to, not because they have to. So you're going to have a lot more luck. No, luck's not the word, success. You're going to have a lot more success developing a mixed income community, mixed tenure community, just mixed everything community, where people want to be in a more diversified, vibrant, active, noisy, crowded, whatever adjective you want to use, area, than in, a suburb, than in a suburb. Because people go to the suburbs, they want space, they want to escape. The space gets into it. And I know I'm taking up way too much time. So if I'm developing and I am aiming for a lower income market or lower income buyers, if I'm doing home ownership, I can't give them as much land because they can't pay me as much, and I've got to pay for that land. So I've got to do higher density so that I can put more units on a given piece of land. Well, that's not what people move into planned communities for. They want their space. So it's a very difficult thing to do. But in the more urban environment, it gets less complicated.
Okay, we have time for one more quick question.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Go for it, Kathy. Stand up and answer it.
So how much does the state get involved, like they did with this Airbnb thing, where they said no city can?
Don't get me started. Yeah, but unfortunately, the state's very involved through legislation.
Really? Yeah.
And well, it's not the state, and the elected officials, and they're responding to various interests. Sadly, the interest with money, the real estate and development lobbies have done a good job of protecting their industries and lobbying for legislation that helps accomplish that. So, yeah, and so that's where I think we need to maybe do a good job of educating voters, and looking at alternatives that might be more conducive to a more vibrant, diverse community.
Really quick.
But Judy has never gotten to ask a question, so stand up, Judy, and ask it.
I would like to ask Marcos where these 10,000 families that are on the way, where are they living now?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think most are doubled up. I think we're in a time where, as Sharayah mentioned, families are shacked up with one another. And so, we've had, on the personal side, I've had children come back home, left home, come back home. My daughter, and she's a single mother, and now she's living with my mom in helping her. And so, Both my granddaughter and daughter are, you know, helping my mom, who would otherwise be alone in her 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. And so I think there is a lot of that. And we hear from a lot of people that come to us and say, hey, you know, I'm on the waiting list, I'm living with my mom, I'm living with another relative. You know, they're ready to throw me out. I need to find a place for my own. I think that's happening more and more these days. And sadly, you know, some are in you know, transitional housing or on the streets. Yeah.
Or in, you know, both Marcos and Sharayah talked about older buildings that are that are in terrible condition.
Yeah,
people are just
some very substandard housing. You know, old hotel or motor court properties, and so that's where we're at, unfortunately.
Okay,
Betsy, ask your question.
What is it, Betsy?
Very quickly, we have several schools that are closed down and so forth. How are they zoned, and are those opportunities?
Yes, they are definitely opportunities.
They're definitely opportunities.
We did one in, our department helped support a project in a rural community in Ajo, Arizona. And a nonprofit group there was successful in assembling enough financing and resources to repurpose, you know, their old high school into affordable housing development.
I'm sure it would not work, and I am here to say I was wrong.
It's worked, but you know, there are challenges, and they've been around almost 15 years, but yeah, but they got through the big hurdle in getting it done. I think, you know, there are definitely some opportunities coming up. TUSD is planning to sell, I think the Menlo Park School is going to go up for sale in the next year.
Elementary is up for sale.
Yeah, so, and we've had some, I know, interest from local developers and investors to repurpose some of these old schools, but unfortunately, you know, we haven't seen one that's been successful in assembling the financing.
Generally, they're more valuable for the land they sit on. The buildings themselves are really not conducive to conversion. But for a place like Corbett Elementary, which is a 1- and 2-story building, has a lot of land. That land is could be a good housing site, but you wouldn't want to reuse the building because it wasn't built as housing. It was built.
Yeah, it's very, very challenging. I
Think how low the toilets are.
Very practical. You might want to replace the bathroom fixture.
Yeah, there was a group of students through the U of A College of Planning and Architecture last year that went through a project looking at the Menlo Park School and looked at some design options and how that could be redeveloped. But David's exactly right. You know, there's a lot of land on a lot of these campuses that provide a lot of opportunities and could, yeah, definitely be developed and repurposed given the right set of circumstances and financing.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask the last question, and I want each of y'all to answer it. If you were the monarch with unlimited powers, how would you solve the issue of affordable housing?
You haven't started, so.
So I've thought a lot about this. I mean, one thing, again, when I think about funding, again, funding being a huge obstacle for us, and what's happened with the whole concept of public housing. Public housing is largely seen as a fail. The government, the federal government right now is in the midst of really dismantling what we know as public housing in that program. But as a result of that, we have no more large public funding left for affordable housing. And I think it was kind of one of those, we threw out the baby with the bathwater kind of thing. Public housing was seen as a fail. Let's just eliminate this and eliminate all the funding for it. Unfortunately, what's happened is that completely privatized housing market. We have no discussions about what public housing means, and maybe it has, again, I think the word that's really replaced it is thinking about mixed income communities and how we diversify our existing communities. And so how do we have those permanent, dedicated public funding streams that go through a public process where people and communities do come together and decide what they want with their neighborhoods and with their communities. And again, I think for me, if I were the monarch, I would add housing as a list of things that people have a right to, in addition to, food and health and all these things. Housing would be on the list. It's a basic need. It's a basic, food, shelter, clothing. It's one of those things that we all, I believe, have a right to, and you can't function. A child cannot function and go to school if they're living out of a car. It's those kinds of things that I really think, if I were Monarch, I would add it to the list of things that we would be funding as a public entity and continually.
Okay, I get a wave of wand.
King Marcus.
Well, yeah, I mean, ideally you could wave a wand and, build 1 million houses and, we'd be done with it, but
You're king, you're not the wizard. You're not the wizard.
Well, being realistic, I think, I think I would, work to, we have I should say, we had a very good state housing trust fund that had a mechanism set up, and then, after the recession, the state legislature reclaimed what was originally set aside as a dedicated stream of funding for that, and I think it was, what, 40 million a year, maybe before it was rated. So I think I would restore that, and then also look to create a local housing trust fund, change the legislature, and allow the communities to, to do things like inclusionary zoning. So through a combination of some, local programs, and work to restore some of the funding on the federal side, I think we start to get to a place where we see enough resources coming into play, and allowing developers to access the capital and credit they need to address the problem. But yeah, restoring the state trust fund, creating local housing trust funds, and then maybe kind of a local. Well, we have a housing commission, so I would have to do that, but but get our housing commission working with local developers and other jurisdictions to work at this together and come up with a program to maybe, or expand on some of the existing programs like the low-income housing tax credit and a state housing tax credit to go along with it. Might as well put that in the picture. So those are some of the things that I think could be done realistically to address this problem in the very near future.
Okay, you're up.
I would hope that I am not a constitutional monarch and I have the authority to dissolve Parliament. But obviously we've talked a lot about density, and I would do a complete rethink of how land is used, so that you could have more balanced. You could have more balanced neighborhoods. You could do a balance between people having the right to be left alone, live in a relatively quiet environment at the same time. Put more housing up, because you're never going to solve the demand problem without addressing the supply problem. On the money side, we need a complete rethinking of how housing is funded in this country. I was on a call-in radio show many years ago, and somebody called in to complain about all these people in subsidized housing and all these people on welfare. And I said, well, and I snapped, and I said, okay, let me ask you a question. Do you own your house? And she said, yeah. I said, do you have a mortgage? She said, yeah. I said, congratulations, you live in subsidized housing. The largest welfare program in this country is the home mortgage interest deduction. And so, all of the federal funding for housing put together is dwarfed by the home mortgage interest deduction. So I would call the Grand Vizier of the Fisc and say to him or her, work with Parliament to come up with a structure that rethinks how housing is financed in this country, so that upper and middle class people are not favored at the expense of poor people.
Okay, so back to reality though. Who are the entities that need to be approached that can make the changes that we know?
Well, we go in reverse order. Obviously, your electeds. I mean, they're the ones who make policy. So it's at the city and county level. It's to, the county bond issue. Work with the board of supervisors to get a bond issue on the ballot, and then work like hell to get the voters to support it. I mean, the problem with the last housing bond issue was there were, 8 different bond elections, and it was so confusing, people threw up their hands and said, ah!
The opposition had a very clear message, on the other hand, was just, no new taxes.
So, obviously, yes, no taxes. So, at the county level, city level, state legislative level, and then national and federal level. Or the national level, so members of Congress and the Senate. I am very happy to say that both of our senators, and you will very rarely hear me say a nice word about one of our senators, but both of our senators signed on to legislation that would dramatically increase the amount of low-income housing tax credits available. It was because people advocated with them. So, advocacy of elected officials is the single most important thing, because they're the ones who set policy.
Want to add anything, either one?
I would just add too that we have a very strong lobbyist for real estate development, and they have historically been one of the barriers for any policy that promotes historical affordable housing. So I would, again, we need lobbyists on the other side. We need lobbyists for affordable housing. We need lobbyists who will push that agenda forward. Again, when I was at the conference I was just at, we just talked a lot about the need for more advocacy in this field and in this area.
Yes, and just to add to it, aside from, the political advocacy, I think as consumers, I think we need to work to educate consumers, because developers are responding to the market. They're responding, to the demand from the public. And so I think if we start to maybe promote some more responsible demand, and we start to see maybe some of our home buyers who are very keen to of their communities and this planet, and I think as we start to see some of their interests come into play in the market, and putting pressure on the market for some of these things that are going to promote sustainability and vibrant communities, diverse communities, communities that are more walkable. And so we're starting to see a little bit of that, but I think we need more, and some more pressure from consumers for more responsible development.
Well, let us all thank this wonderful panel.